Hi, welcome to Dan's Modelworks. I'm Natasha, and today Dad and I are doing a collaboration video, and the subject is going to be improving side molds of car models. As you can see, this Mustang kit, like many older car kits, has a tub, where the details are molded into the side. One detail that suffers the most are the window winders, which oftentimes look pretty flat. So we're going to try to fix that with some resin castings.
So as Natasha explained, the window winders, or the regulators as they're actually called, on her Mustang kit are molded into the sidewall of the tub, which means they don't have very much relief. As a matter of fact, they're just basically lines. What we have here is window regulators, or winders as most people know them, from another model. This model is actually... Yes, this is the kit that we got the window winders from. And after I make a mold of these parts, I'll be putting them back into a little plastic baggie and putting them back in here, since I don't know when I'm going to get around to this. And it has separate sidewall detail in the cab, and especially it has these two chrome parts that represent the window winders, or the regulators. So I drilled two small holes in the plastic. This one's obviously way too big, but two small holes because these parts actually have an axle at the back, and I've glued them on using white glue. So the next step is we're going to put a few coats of latex on them.
This is the latex we use to make our molds. It is available at most craft stores.
Then once that's done, we'll have some molds with which we can create as many window winders as we want. So any future projects that need to have window regulators / winders, we'll just be able to pop out some parts and paint them silver and glue them on. So looking like a beige blob of snot, this is probably about 12 coats of latex. And there you can see it has set, but I would say this is not ready for use yet. It's too light. It should be a little bit darker and more translucent. I've used molds like this when they're in this state before, and it's not good, so we're actually going to wait maybe 24 hours. So our mold has now gotten to a less creamy color than it was, and that's usually how you know that this stuff is really set. So to mix up a batch of resin for something this small is a little silly. So usually what I'll do is, if I've got small items like this to do, I'll cast something large. And I need one more wheel for the upcoming, or maybe you've already seen the beginning of it, project that requires all these truck wheels. So we're going to do one of these at the same time. So ordinarily, I would use these little mixing cups that came with my resin. But Xena, the warrior princess's sidekick, Natasha, decided that when I said, "Can you get the crusty stuff out of here?" she drove her thumb right through it. So that one's not any good. So I don't have a matching one for this. So what we'll do is we'll use two of the little paper cups that I normally use for mixing. Normally what I do is I'll use the measuring things to pour out equal amounts of each part of the resin, then I'll use 1 cup to mix it. So what we'll do is we'll guesstimate the right quantity for A mixture in one and B mixture in the other, and then we'll combine them in the B mixture. Whatever the yellow one, that'll be the one that we mix it up in. It should work fine, and I did really need new cups anyway, so. But before you're going to do this, you need to have some sort of mold release. And what I find works best is just some baby powder. So you just shoot some in there. You don't want to put too much in, but you want to make sure that it's in all little crevices and stuff like that. So this will probably be the last time I use this mold, because what's starting to happen is it's starting to keystone a little bit. It's starting to actually, the top edge here is starting to stretch a little bit. So I'm probably not going to be able to get any more decent wheels out of it after this one. This is a good thing I'm not married anymore and I don't have a wife to get pissed at me for things like this. I keep this plate downstairs. The idea is it's ceramic, so it doesn't mind the heat. Because what we're going to do is we're going to set the molds we're going to use on here. And we're going to hit them with a hairdryer. Now, I suppose you could probably use a heat gun, but you don't really need that sort of extreme heat. Now, in the instructions, they're thinking that you're going to be using their silicone. And apparently, if you microwave the silicone, it gets the molds nice and hot. Since I'm too cheap to use that stuff, the rubber molds, if you hit them with a hairdryer, that usually is enough. And I'm assuming the reason you warm up the molds is to provide some of the heat that the chemical reaction is going to need. So the B mixture is the dark browny color one that'll end up being creamy by the time we're done. And the A mixture here is the clear one. And this is much easier to pour and dump and measure and things like that. So what I usually do is, if I had my measuring containers, which I don't now, I would measure out the same amount of each, because they got to be the same amounts, you know, plus or minus probably about 5 or 10%. There is a little bit of error factor that's all right. But what I usually found is I would pour the B mixture first, because that takes a long time to get it all to go into your mixing. And I like using these little Dixie cups, which is basically what you buy to put in your bathroom so your kids can use them up in about 3 days. And then you never buy them again. So, but I'm actually going to use these for measuring, and that should work fine. Normally, the size of the part you're going to want, that's how much of the aluminite you're going to mix up. So basically, if you want to fill up this, you're going to have about half of the volume of this made up of this, and about half of it made up of that. And I find it's always better to make up a little bit more than you think you're going to need, because you know what? You can always leave some in the cup. If you don't mix up enough, then you've basically wasted, you know, 3/4 of that much aluminite to make a part that's not usable, because you can't really add to it. So I have our, hopefully, very close quantities mixed up. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be as close as you can get it. So I'll be pouring mixture A into mixture B, and you should have something to stir it ready. I've got this, which has already been used a few times and is starting to look a little obscene. Also, you should have something like a nail ready. The reason you have a nail ready is for any mold in which you've got like a lot of, it's a fairly large casting and you got details and stuff. What I'll do is, after I put the resin in, obviously before it sets up, I'll take the nail and I'll kind of pull it around in all the little crevices and things like that. Because what happens is you'll get air bubbles. And they won't all rise to the surface. And you'll pop it out and you'll be, well, this would be a nice part if it didn't have all these little air bubbles in it. So at least by kind of dragging the nail through it, you should be able to get most of those air bubbles out. And as for our small parts, once we mix up the resin, I'm just going to use the stir stick. I'm just going to dip it into the resin and I'm just going to go drop, drop, because that's all those parts are going to need. They're just going to need a little drop. You don't need massive quantities in there, because you're going to have to sand off anything that is over and above what you need. All right, so I've got my stir stick, I got my A and B mixture, mix it together here. Okay, I promise I'm not going to drink it and do a Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing. I think we have way more than we need, which is fine. You can see the color change happening. You looking? So I'm going to take a little bit to put into our little mold. See, that's all we needed. Now I'm going to pour it into our big mold. And we've got the nail, the all-important nail. Because we want to get any air bubbles out. I know this is a good shot of my hand. I'm trying to disturb all the areas where I know the air bubbles are going to be snagging. You can see them coming to the top. This should be setting up in a second. Whoop, starting to set up. You can see it. Look at that. Oh, look at the big snot bubble. This magic happens. So you can see why you can't just let the bubbles come up on their own. You got to really kind of thrash around to get them out. You can see it's already set up. It's all been of maybe a minute and a half since we turned the camera off. It's quite hot. And some of that is from the mold originally, but a lot of it is actually coming from the chemical reaction itself. The small parts, they don't generate quite as much heat, which is one of the reasons you want to warm up your molds. Okay. Let's see if we can get these out. There we go. Focus, there you go. One window winder. And two window winders. Should I chuckle the count? Ha, ha, ha. So we now have a mold that we can use over and over and over again to make window winders, or regulators, as the purists will probably insist, for cars that don't have power windows. This one's still pretty hot, so I'm not going to try to pull it out. But I have already cast a whole snot load of these out of this mold before, so I know this mold works. So there we can see our window regulator. It actually stands out in relief on both sides. Looks a little bit better than the non-existent ones that was molded in.